What's up, future Shredlords? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. I'm often asked about the science of solos, if you will, so I thought we'd do this quick lesson today. And I just want to keep these lessons nice and light, just whatever I feel like during the day. There's no real purpose here, man. It's music, so you should be practicing a whole bunch of different stuff all the time. Songs sometimes, working on covers, if you will, working on solos, if that's your thing. Although I would recommend, of course, embracing your own strengths and sort of study the player and be like, what's the most important stuff about their playing style that I can now adapt over to my playing style? But that's up to you. I'll leave it up to you, right? Essentially, you're always kind of bouncing around. So I don't want to make these videos like boring and stale and stuff like that by constantly having to rely on gimmicks and stuff. Instead, we just keep talking about the same subject matter, but approach it slightly differently. And hopefully that'll connect with people and just sink in over the long time. You're really not absorbing anything new. Once you kind of get the basics of music down, it's a question of taste and improvisational abilities and how fast can you think on your feet and how well can you arrange the notes based on what you're hearing as far as the backing track and stuff. But as far as the solo is concerned, there's the setup, the solo, and then the end, right? So that's a really basic one. You hear this a lot in solos. You probably just didn't notice it as much. Where there's like a slower melodic passage that precedes the super psycho shred, which in this case, I just did that crazy tapping lick. But again, based off this whole step configuration, right? From the pentatonic scale. So I was like, why not reuse that bad boy again? It's just goes to show you how utilitarian it can be once you add a few more elements to it. Oh my gosh. Insanity, of course. Then we get into the dime bag stuff. I thought for sure it's got a bit of a sort of Cowboys from Hell, the whole album kind of vibe there, and then get into the wide interval sort of pentatonic stuff, and then finally ending it with that crazy sort of sweep into the pentatonic and the tap all together to get the really super psycho speed aspect in there. And then just end it off with something more basic. Again, I just use the exact same ascension, except for when I get here, I'm moving up into the next shape, but I'm still using it essentially as a vehicle to recycle the idea in the first place so that people get this grounding effect. One time I do it with tapping, the other time I do it with picking, and it just subconsciously brings the listener back down to a space that they've sort of enjoyed, but they're hearing it in a new way. And that's an old time trick that the composers used hundreds of hours, thousands of hours really of study of their music that I did right there. I'm like, oh, look, there's that part again, but it's slightly, you see this all the time in movies too. You'll see like a sad scene and they'll just reuse the same theme for like, The Empire Strikes Back or the Star Wars or whatever it is. And then when it's happy, it's all triumphant and stuff. That's one of the oldest ones in the book. Check it out next time you're listening to music, when you're listening to the actual orchestral scores. More of the new stuff is just like soundscapes sort of idea and minimalism, which is pretty cool too. So without further ado, and yip yapping on my part, I'm sorry. Let's get into this lesson. All right, Shred Sexies, let's talk about the setup. Essentially, the setup in this case is just me sort of like developing a melody around the key of G major, right? So I start off in this Locrian position. Right, and then jumping down to Aeolian. Right, there's the three notes from Aeolian. There's the three notes from Locrian, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian again, right? So you're starting to see each one of those little scale fragments has a name, if you will. And if I kept going down in relation to this one, I'd be like, right, to get into the, sorry, of course, I screw it up now. I get into the Aeolian position and I keep moving down, right? And that gives me Locrian moving up here. And then into Ionian, of course, and then I keep going into Dorian, Phrygian, into Lydian, and so on and so forth, right? So you're going to do stuff like that to sort of map it all out, but that's where that first little section came from, right? Then that leads back into this major pentatonic configuration. Might as well add that blues note, the flat third, right? damn, kid, come on, right? So flat and third, and just chromaticism. Remember, every time there's this whole step configuration, you can fill it in, and then of course where there's the minor third configuration, fill it in with the modal notes. And then of course you've got that flat and third there. From here, oh, that's right, Phrygian. Very useful tool, man. It's going to make a huge difference in your playing because now you can just cycle all over the fretboard just using chromaticism, the minor pentatonic scale, and one configuration of the major scale, in this case, this and then this. And if you're going backwards, this and then this. Nails it. I know. Craziness. Right? So starting off Locrian, ending down here into Aeolian, then back up into this major, flat and third. Getting this new target note here so I can do the same rhythmic sequence. Jumping down, of course, we just talked about it, those notes from the 3 notes per string system, in this case, Ionian. Right, so good stuff there, but once I'm here, right, so I've kind of, why not throw in an arpeggio? Again, those 3 notes from the 3 notes per string system on the G string, on G major here. And from here, I'm just doing this arpeggio, right? Again, all notes from this scale system. Of course, this is E minor, right? There's E major as a triad, E minor, E diminished, right? Manipulating those triads. So that's where that came from. Of course, 3 notes per string. That's Locrian position, right? And then I'm, of course, just getting in there. You could do an arpeggio now. It doesn't really matter, right? The most important thing is just to sort of like in your mind set up a melody-based idea, right? See what I'm saying? Just like that. And notice how I didn't just go where it's all a scale kind of situation. There's pauses, there's an arpeggio in there, there's a little bit of swing, that the faintest hint of swing in there, right? Where I'm just sort of, you know, waltzing the notes together instead of doing like the strictly, 8th, 16th routine where you're just always playing on the beat and whatnot. Always be sort of like, just, if you can, like microsense to one side or the other, and it just adds a little bit of tastiness, humanness, if you will, right? So that's the setup. When you're talking about the shred now, in this case, all I did was, everything I tapped was at the 12th fret. I'm just using what a lot of guitar players are calling the spine, right? There's this pentatonic, the minor here, and then of course, the same one is shared by Mixolydian, okay? So I have this whole sequence of frets, and I'm like, why make the lick will sound killer, but the idea behind it isn't really that hard. So I'm using the whole step configuration from the minor pentatonic scale. So right, that's 3, 5, 7, then 5, 7, 5, 7, all the way up to the D string, and then I'm jumping up again to 9, 7, 9, then it's gonna go 10, or sorry, that's 8, 10, and then 7, 10. And from this position, which is essentially the Phrygian pentatonic here, now I'm just going to do a string skipping minor 7 arpeggio. If you watch that recent interview from Rick Beato and Mateus, he does the exact same one, just better. Of course, right? So that's where that came from. The high E there, that's 7-10 then. What's that? 7-9 on the G string and then 7-10 on the A string. Now there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. There's the opening ones where I'm always pulling to the outside, right? I call those open. And then I have the closed versions where I'm like just doing it on one string. Right, so then it's just a question of getting the string skipping part. And sometimes I like to do this turnaround, right? So I'll leave it up to you, can also get some extra juiciness in there too, okay? So that's a very useful technique. Paul Gilbert uses it too. Okay, done. So that's the arpeggio section. Of course, after that, I'm jumping up into this dime bag sequence basically, but I'm tapping the first one, right? Instead of using my finger like this, I'm doing the tap, so now I can then move into this. Wow, I can't barely see here. I can go into this pentatonic, right? And then of course I'm just doing it again up here in the next shape. So you can do whichever ones you want though. It doesn't have to be the pentatonic sequence there. I'm not going to try it because I can't really see with the microphone on my face. My eyes keep wanting to focus on this huge thing. Obviously it's right here. And so it gives me even more of a weird perspective situation. Plus I think I have to be leaning back a little bit. I'm noticing that when I look straight down like that, it's kind of weird. I'm used to sort of getting more into the Van Halen move and leaning back so I can see the fretboard a little bit clearer. That's the tricky thing about tapping and stuff like that. You'll notice it that when you look down, even when you're tapping, it can be off a little bit by like one fret and stuff because of what we call parallax. So you have to really work on it. And then what I would do is just get used to just closing your eyes and doing an alternating sequence, Greg Howe style, where you're just doing a whole step and then maybe doing the next position up and stuff like that, and just work on it slowly and whatnot. The tapping thing is quite tricky. It just takes a lot of practice and stuff like that. I can't really do them slowly anymore. For whatever reason, my brain, when it comes to the tapping thing, is like, nah. Because I was always more of into the really shreddy tapping stuff, so I think it's just one of those limitations, and that's why I don't do it as much, because it's I can get into a situation. But that's it. I'm doing a tapping sequence for the shred, but essentially I'm doing this whole step sequence. And then of course and you can do whatever tap again on the extension note that you want from the pentatonic scale. From the major modes, it's whatever you want. It's just I'm using that as the extra sort of spiciness, if you will, to really set off that big arpeggio, which is just a minor with those notes from the pentatonic tacked on. Right, so see, when I do it fast, fine. Do it slow, negative. I don't know, it's a mental problem I have. So that essentially gets you to that part, of course, and then moving back down into the open position just to set up home bass again. And then I'm going to, of course, use this ascending run of whole steps again, because again, it gives a continuity between the tapping part. Again, notice this yin and yang on this one. And then I want the same type of idea. In this case, I did a whole tapping run using the full step sequence, and then I'm doing this chromatic run, ending in the minor pentatonic there, right? Kind of situation. I can't remember what else I did there at the very end. I think I go keep on up. That sort of bending into the highest notes. But again, I use the blues just to bring it back to the original idea that I was doing, which is sort of like a fusion-y type of blues. I love the blues. I love Van Halen, of course, and countless other guitar players from the 80s, and the pentatonic. That was our jam, and it still is my jam, and I'm still experimenting and figuring it out and all the rest of this good stuff. And that's really what you should be doing too. But notice the mechanics involved. If I sat here and I just talked to you the whole time about, oh, tap here and do this, the lesson would get really bogged down. Instead, you're like, okay, what is he talking about, this whole step configuration and ascending using the major pentatonic, the minor pentatonic system, whatever you want to call it, right? So I'm starting here in this major. That's 3-5, which gets me now to the Dorian position, which has 3 in a row there. And then I can do it again. And I get this shift here between the G and the B string because of the tuning, and I can jump up one more time. Oh, look, there's the major. And come down the other way, right? That was the major there. Into the minor pentatonic. I'm always using that whole step configuration of, I guess, 2 frets up or 3 frets, whatever you want to look at that as. Right, so I'm just using that. And then, of course, we mentioned it, chromaticism. Oh, what's that? Right, yes. Flat and third or one of the other bluesy notes. I mean, it doesn't really matter. If you know what they are, that's great. If you don't, it doesn't really matter. The thing is, can you hear that? Right, again. Right, getting a little more spicy there at the end by substituting in major, I know. But that's just it. Another thing I learned much later on is like, be experimental. You never know. I would have never come up with the... And that's a good exercise right there, just to get the stretch in, right? Just sort of sit there and alternate picking it, maybe faster. Whatever you're going to do, right? But then sort of factor in the tapping. Right, so give me a couple whacks at it there. We'll get it eventually. Lessons of the year here, people. Love it. Right, but you get the idea. That's the thing, is this whole step configuration. You're like, I can now start tapping all on the 12th fret, so you might just start there and just be like... Changing it up to the rhythmic value, and then up. What's the next one? Right, and you're off to the races. And you'll sit there for 6 months doing that, and then it goes from 1 string to 2 strings and 3 strings, and then all 6 strings or 7 or however many you got. And you're like, look, there's this whole sequence that I can use with that by tapping on. And then there's... Now, that's pretty useful. What if I came down here? Again, notice I'm just using the notes from the pentatonic scale itself. Just skipping over the appropriate one, right? Right now, you can tap out all the extension notes with respect to the pentatonic scales over top of those and then have an incredibly powerful tool. If you were to do that with a bunch of tapping, all the steps in it, damn. But just to start off, people are like, well, I can't do the tapping. But that doesn't stop you from being like, if I take the high E and then the G and to the A, and I play that sequence based on this Mixolydian position, then I get this first arpeggio. And I do the same thing down here at Phrygian. There's one, okay? And so on and so forth. This one might be tricky. Now that one you might be like, I have to start with 4 and 2, then jump down to 3 and 1, and then 4 and 1. So that's a dexterity exercise and in conjunction with the string skipping stuff, right? And of course, just start tapping all of this stuff out. And you're like, oh my God, look at this is a great tool. I get to use the pentatonic in a whole new way now that sounds way more modern, because now you can tap out all those bluesy notes like I did with the dime stuff. And now you have this incredibly useful tool, right? Where you don't need to know more information. It's just the same scales you've always had, this one. Which becomes... And you're like, to the next one. And you're like... And yes, if I were to start on the B string here, right? Of course, I'm going to, in this case, right? And that's going to get me down to this whole stab. So now I've got 2 sets of arpeggios that basically happen at the same place. There's me combining them together, right? So you know what to do, right? And this is all about the trial and error process. It's all about discovery on the guitar. It's all about the sort of application of the basic music rules and stuff like that. Later on, the shred will come. But if you just do shred all the time, then you'll never get the setup or the end, right? It just comes out as shred. And after like a few minutes, it just becomes repetitive. It doesn't matter how impressive the shred is. You need to have contrast between the loud and quiet parts, the fast and slow parts, more emotion, bluesiness with technicality or fusion or outside playing or whatever. It's all got to be thrown into the cauldron at one time and sort of mixed in gradually until the perfect potion is concocted, right? In this case, it's the solo, and that's really the thing. I was like, you know, as far as the first part, stay pretty much grounded in this Locrian position. Except for this one particular note, right? And then also in this major. But I saw this as the Dorian position of the minor pentatonic system instead of 3 notes per string, which gives me Ionian, right? Same thing here, right? This is major. But this is Locrian, or you could say it's Aeolian there, right? So on and so forth. So you can see that they start to overlap and whatnot, and that's just it, organizing your mind to be like, okay, there it is. Right? All in there as one sort of thing. In this case, just nice. Right now, of course, I'm starting to get off the rails there a little bit, but that was badass, right? Come on, that's what I'm talking about. Be unpredictable in your playing. Just play those tritones. Play strange sequences. Notice there when I move that half step down, in my mind I'm like, there's that half whole tone scale, or would probably be more appropriate, right? And you could do the, again, using that rhythmic idea, right? These things, as you can see, get recycled. So that's the important part. Oh, look, I can do this call and answer of this little melody aspect. That's going to be useful. I can do this representation of notes as tapping, or I can do it as picking, but in this case, I'm going to add some chromaticism. Right then. Always looking for that strong note to end your phrases on it. And boom, insta solo. And then, of course, the cherry on top is if you can combine multiple techniques. I didn't go too crazy, kept it with the scales and the tapping and stuff. But of course, there's a whole bunch of other stuff to get mined in there too, right? Interval stuff, right? Contour scales, arpeggio sequences, like done in small sections. So, you know, where you're sort of like, there's some intervals, right? Stuff like that, right? So you have a ton of tools and a ton of time to play around there. And that's just it. When you're doing your improvisations with the backing tracks and stuff like that, instead of just going off on a tangent and just being like, la, 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 instead be like, okay, let's try working on the setup here. And then do one of your favorite shreddy parts that you're already good at, and then try to go into like an ending section and try to be like, tie all three of those elements together to be like, there it is for like about 30 or 30 seconds to a minute. I created a whole phrasing of music that's one self-contained element, right? Done. And there you are. You are on the road to making the best solo that you possibly can. I hope this lesson helped out. Thanks for hanging out, guys. I really appreciate you. I hope you have a great Sunday. I love all of you. Work on your music. Believe in yourself. And just get your nose to the grindstone. It will happen if you put in the work. We'll see you in the next one.